4 summers ago, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was working for rock and roll magazine, LA Record, indie rock magazine, and my mother calls me because I'm coming out to Boston the following weekend for a cousin's wedding. But the real reason that she was calling me was that my youngest sister, Sherry, who was living in New York City, was going to be bringing her boyfriend, her new boyfriend, to the wedding. And my mother tells me, and I think you're going to like him, Scott, because his father, who passed away a while ago, he was a magazine publisher. And so I said, oh, really? That's interesting. What magazine did he publish? I might have heard of it. And she goes, I think it was called Creep or Creek. And I go, you mean Cream magazine? And she goes, yeah, I think that's it. Have you heard of that before? And I said, Mom, that's the magazine that turned me bad when I was 12. And by bad, of course, I mean the abbreviation for badass. Because Cream magazine was known as America's rock and roll magazine. And it's really like ground zero for postmodern rock and roll journalism. Lester Bangs was the editor, like at the peak of their glory. And that was the magazine that coined punk rock, heavy metal, and for me, it's where I learned about sarcasm and objectivity and learning to question authority and question your heroes just as much. And for better or worse, from the time I saw that first issue when I was 12, Cream magazine was my blueprint for life. And I told my mother, I have his father's jacket in a closet in my apartment. And my mom's like, oh, that's nice, blah, blah, blah. See you next week. And then about 10 minutes later, I get a call from my sister, Sherry. And she's like, what's this deal about you having my boyfriend's father's jacket in your closet? He's been dead for 25 years. And I said, yeah. And so I explained to her how this jacket ended up in my closet in Los Angeles. See, my roommate, he was from Detroit, Michigan, and his older brother, Ribs, used to work in the mailroom at Cream magazine. And at the time that Barry Kramer, the publisher, had died. And my sister's boyfriend's mother, Connie, had taken over the paper, and she was getting rid of his effects. And because Ribs was on the poor side of town and couldn't afford leather jackets and stuff like that, and fit the jackets, it was the same size as Barry Kramer, she said, why don't you take these jackets, because you can't afford them. And Ribs grew up to become a hoarder on a family farm in rural Detroit. So my roommate goes back to Detroit for a high school reunion and goes to visit his brother at the farm. And he sees these rad jackets in this room filled with stacked papers and all this clutter. And he's like, what's the deal with these leather jackets? And he explains. So he takes them with him to Los Angeles because he knows those jackets are just going to gather dust for 20 years. And the first jacket I never saw, but I heard it was like the most awesome jacket ever. It was like total lead singer jacket with the swag waist and strands hanging down, like long hair required type jacket, that like Mark Bolan, a T-Rex, would wear, or Robert Plant. And one of our mutual friends, Yogi, he was playing guitar in a metal band called Buckcherry, took it with him on tour, and he met this girl in Europe and lent her the jacket and never saw her or the jacket again. So the second jacket was like more of a drummer's jacket, like a heavy biker leather jacket. And another mutual friend of ours named D'Angelo took that jacket with him on the road when he was working the sound for the Stones, and met a girl, and she took the jacket, never saw her or the jacket again. So I meet Tom a few years later when I'm working on an internet project with him, and he knows I'm a big fan of music journalism, so he shows me the jacket, and it was awesome. Not as awesome as the other two. It was more like a band manager's jacket. And it was like kind of practical blazer, but it had that retro cut and collar from the 70s. And so my sister says, Connie remembers Ribs, can you send a picture of the jacket? So I send the picture of the jacket, and she's like, yeah, that's the jacket, and that's so weird. And so I tell my roommate Tom, and he lets me take the jacket with me to the wedding, and he just says, just whatever you do, don't lose it. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And so I'm hanging out with my sister and her boyfriend, and he's not as rock and roll as I was hoping he'd be. Like I pictured some long hair with mutton chops and a Fu Manchu, and but he's a good guy. He's a corporate attorney, and but nice guy. So I take him back to my hotel room to show him the jacket. And he's like, wow. And I go, you want to try it on? And he's like, yeah. And he puts it on, and it fits him perfectly. And he's like, man, I feel a charge going through me. And I take a picture, and he's got like anime eyes. He's totally glowing. And I say, dude, you can have that jacket. And he's like, thanks, man. And I go back to LA, and my roommate Tom says, so, did you show him the jacket? And I said, yeah, it fit him perfectly, and I told him he could have it. And he goes, dude, now he has to marry your sister, because that's like a total Luke Skywalker thing. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And last September, my sister and JJ got married. And I got to hang out with all the Cream dudes, and it was awesome, and I went to visit them and got to bring magazines back. And this February, my sister is going to give birth to their first child, and I'm going to be the badass, broke, sarcastic, tell it like it is, straight shooting, rock and roll uncle of the grandchildren of Cream magazine. And that's what I call a happy ending.